Welcome everyone to the MBA Tour Singapore. I hope you're having a good day. My name is Shalvi Singh. I'm the marketing manager with the Graduate Management Admission Council, and I've been part of the team which speaks to candidates, informs them about everything related to MBA, about the GMAT exam, and of course about their study abroad plans across the world to candidates from East Asia, which is Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Africa. I would like to welcome you all. We are joined today here by a dozen of world's leading business schools, and shortly you'll be participating in your scheduled meetup sessions with the schools. If you don't have a meetup scheduled yet, please go to the schedule a meetup link and an MBA Tour staff will be able to help you set one up. With that, I would also like to encourage you to visit the schools at their booth. There is a section called the University Hall. You can go and chat with them directly as well. Okay, so now to open tonight's event, I am delighted to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Kenneth Tan. He's based out of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He's an MBA from a top B school, which is IESE, based out of Spain, University of Navarra in Barcelona. Who doesn't want to stay in Barcelona, right? So Kenneth graduated from Oxford University and completed his MBA at IESE Business School, spending a term on exchange at Cornell University as well. He's currently the HR director of a leading fintech firm in Malaysia. I would like Kenneth to speak more about him, and he could give you a brief as to who he is and how did he have his journey. So Kenneth, why don't we start with you giving a bit about your background, and then we can go ahead with the questions, which would be mostly gravitating around why an MBA is a smart choice for an uncertain future in these times. So over to you, Kenneth.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for inviting me. And it's always fun, sharing experiences with people who may well be in the same position that I was in not so many years ago. So a little bit about me. So I have, a degree in humanities. Now, it is extremely unusual here in Asia, for someone not to have some sort of a financial or technical background. So having a degree in history, the first thing that hits you is, what am I supposed to do with that? But fortunately, managed to find a job. I was working in TV for 6 years, so I have a degree in history. I ended up working in TV programming. I was working for a documentary channel that handled history programming. Surprise, surprise. And that's what I did for the best part of 6 years. And after 6 years, I started to wonder, as I headed towards my, late 20s, wondering what next, in terms of my own personal and career growth. And that's when I started speaking to other people, and MBA was one of those options that I could do. So for someone like me who didn't really know at that point of time what I wanted to do, an MBA offered some sense of a direction. Now, I have to emphasize that no decision is the be-all and end-all. Going to business school is not necessarily going to answer all your questions. But what it does do, though, is that it offers you options. It helps you hone your thinking. It helps you narrow down what you like or don't like. So for someone like me, with a fairly generic background, not really knowing what I wanted to do, for the longer run in future, an MBA was the sort of very highly marketable, highly transferable, highly sought after qualification that I needed, to help me get my thinking back on track.
Interesting. So now that you've told us why did you decide to do an MBA, but what was the process for you to choose a business school?
Okay, so that one actually, it's simple in hindsight, but I could also tell you that then when I was trying to figure out what to do, it was naturally a big question mark. So this is what I did. For me, I have a degree from Oxford. Okay, great, well and good. But on the same token, I was still clueless, so that didn't particularly help. But I knew what I wanted and what I didn't want based on my personal background. And this was my personal thinking. Now,
Hmm.
I spent many years in the UK, so going to an English-speaking country was not going to add anything new. I knew what it was like living in the UK, so going to the US or Australia, that may well be more of the same. So I wanted to move away from my comfort zone. So that's why I thought, okay, continental Europe, that sounds like a great place. And secondly, also, you have an option of 1 or 2 year programs. So there are many programs out there, your traditional 2-year MBAs that you find in the US, as well as many other offerings around other parts of the world that generally are 1-year programs. Now, for me, again, looking at my own background, I've got a degree in the humanities. So I thought having a solid grounding in business was something I needed. I've never actually had a formal business education. So spending 2 years rather than one, for me made sense. In fact, one of the very first things they make you do when you go to B school is accounting. For non-accountant like me, that was a bit of a slog. But having said that, I'm glad I did that because it gave me what I wanted. The B school is one of those things where it's a chance for you to learn things you wouldn't otherwise have learned, had you gone off on your own. So looking at my own personal background, I thought a 2-year program would be beneficial. And lastly, ultimately, I wanted a place that, was a good school. At the end of the day, when after looking at the geography, after looking at whether you wanted a 1 or 2-year program, ultimately, what I would tell most people, friends of mine who ask as well, is I think that academic rigor is extremely important. Now, B school is unusual in many senses. I mean, many people go to business school for a variety of reasons. But I would also venture to say that much as you want to go back to school for the lifestyle, to have fun, build a network, etc. But ultimately, really, it's also a place where you learn things, learn new things. You transform yourself, things that you won't otherwise normally have learned, on the job. A B school is a chance for you to go learn all those things. And that's why finding a school that would give you that academic rigor, that would put you through the paces, make you a different person, a changed person, that for me was important. So looking at all those three criteria, for me, it was fairly straightforward, actually, when you think about it. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to go to an English-speaking country. So, okay,
Mhm.
so that there goes US, UK, Australia. I wanted a 2-year program, okay, narrowed down further. And ultimately, as we like to do here in Asia, rankings somehow, are important. Now, again, they are not the be all and end all, but if you don't have any other thing to fall back on, looking at several reputable rankings is not a bad thing. So you look up, a few of those more reputable rankings, and you would find that by and large, the good schools would all tend to gravitate, towards the top of all of those rankings. So for me, it was a very clear choice. IESE or IESE, as we call it in Spain, that for me was the choice, that stood out. So for me, it was a very straightforward process once you know what your criteria is.
Great, great. I think those are some amazing experiences also that you've shared along with your selection process. And I must say you had quite a narrow criteria, so a very less number of business schools would have put it. So that's great to know. Now, before I
Mm-hmm.
move to the next question, just an announcement for the audiences. You can type your questions in the chat section if you have anything to ask from Kenneth. Because if we have time, we'll dedicate the last 8 to 10 minutes to picking up questions from what you guys ask. So now moving on, you've talked about your decision process and your selection process, but
Mm-hmm.
what about an post MBA experience? Like, how would you say that the MBA has shaped your career?
Yeah. Uh, okay. And that's a fascinating question simply because I think I have a slight benefit of having been out of business school for a few years. Now, if you were to ask someone straight out of business school, they would give you a certain answer. I myself would probably also have a certain answer. Now, I graduated in 2014, so it's 6 years now. Um, and, looking back over the last few years, certain things, certain advantages that you have as an MBA graduate, perhaps weren't apparent to me back then. Now, people going into business school, the immediate thing that you think about is, okay, I need to build a network, I need to make myself more marketable, and those are all well and good. Those are what you will get. But looking at how my career shaped up, I also realized one thing, and this is something that, again, for me, I would attribute it directly to the business school itself. So I started, before MBA, I worked in television. I worked in TV. Again, it's a very strange industry. Not many people are in it. So how do you change yourself from a very industry-specific role into something much more broad-based? I'm now in HR for fintech. And in between, over the last few years, I have done everything from business development, corporate communications, corporate strategy, risk management, internal audit, amongst those that I can think of right now. I'm quite sure I've done much more. Everything from looking at P&Ls to looking at contracts, negotiating contracts. Now, what I realized was that the reason why I could do it, not to say other people can't, but on the same token, why I am probably more suitable to do all these things was simply because I am much more of a generalist. You realize that in many companies, most people are functional experts. A sales guy is a sales guy, a marketing guy is a marketing guy, IT guy is an IT guy, and that's that. What an MBA affords you is this ability to cut across different functions. I realized that in my career that I know a lot of lawyers who can't read Excel sheets. I know a lot of finance guys who can't read contracts, and then technical guys who can't talk to marketing people and vice versa. And what an MBA exposes you really are all these things. Now, I know some schools, may differ in terms of their emphasis, rightly or wrongly. But one thing, again, that in hindsight I thought was a good reason why I chose IESE, was the fact that it is a general management approach. They focus a lot on that. They stress a lot on the general management approach. They want to make you into someone who could deal with anything, regardless of what they are. And for me, that was a benefit. Now, I myself actually had a little bit of insecurity, shall we say. I was never really sure whether what I did was the right thing or not. I know some people would say things like, oh, you can potentially be a jack of all trades and a master of none. May or may not be a good thing. Now, the issue is this. If you are in a company with a lot of masters, being a jack of all trades and a master of none is an advantage because you're the only guy who can cut across everything. And that's how I ended up post-MBA, having the variety of roles that I've had. Now, I'm not sure I necessarily foresaw that, but looking back in hindsight, I can say that if there's an advantage to doing an MBA, especially an MBA program like the one at IESE, where it is, very much a general management program, I thought for me, it was an advantage, and that's how I could seamlessly transition from one role to another.
Yep. That's some great advice and insights shared by you, Kenneth. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure candidates do so too. So I think this would be my last question. If time permits, I would take one more question. So, we all know these are unprecedented times, right? Nobody expected the pandemic to hit. When you did your MBA, you had nothing of this sort. So what advice would you give to other candidates who are considering doing an MBA in these times?
Yeah. Okay. First things first. COVID-19 is unusual in many ways. But on the same token, it's not unlike any other crisis. Now, what makes it unusual is the fact that it's a health crisis rather than an economic crisis. But on the same token, it is a health crisis that led into many other economic issues. I think that the key thing is this, and here I also speak not only as an MBA but also as a HR director. I have seen a lot of people struggling to cope with new realities, the new normal, call it what you will. I'm again going back to one of the things I've said. Being able to adapt to many different things, being able to be a jack of all trades of sorts, gives you an advantage. Now, the degree of advantage depends on how you use it. well, one of the things we know for sure is that the way people work will be changing. Certain roles, certain jobs will be changing. Some of them may or may not exist anymore. Now, the only way to cope with uncertainty is really having this ability to adapt to the unknown. Now, how do you? But on the same token, I know some of you will probably be asking, how do you study for an exam you don't know anything about? How do you prepare for something that is unknown? That's the whole purpose of being unknown. Now, this is where, again, tying it back into my MBA experience. What's interesting, again, that I thought in hindsight was the fact that they throw everything at you. Now, like in IESE, for example, we are a very much case method based school. We do case studies all the time. Now, in the absence of any real world experience, in the absence of being there and then in a particular problem, the next best thing you can do is a case study. And a case study describes a real case with real problems, or sometimes, to make it tricky, it's a real case without an obvious problem. And the whole purpose is really to put you through the paces. Throw a case at you, figure it out. What are you going to do? And imagine you're doing 3 cases a day, 5 days a week for 2 years. That's 500-600 cases that you're covering over the course of your 2-year MBA. By the time you come out, you may not be ready for everything. We can't guarantee that, but you're pretty much ready for many things. And I think that's one of those things that people gain from doing an MBA. So going back to one of those classic examples, does experience matter? In times of crisis, what do you do? Do you find the smartest guy, or do you give the job to the most experienced guy? Pros and cons to every answer, but what an MBA does is it exposes you to many different elements. Gone are the days when people need to have a 30-year working experience in order to be able to cope to future experiences. One of the things that a lot of these new crises have exposed us to is the fact that sometimes experienced people are not always the best people, because if they've never seen it before, they get stuck. And sometimes new crisis calls for new approaches and new solutions. And that's where people with broad-based backgrounds, multidisciplinary exposure and training, such as an MBA, that is something that could potentially help you in times of crisis. So, how do you deal with uncertainty? Many answers to it, but an MBA, I think, if you ask me, between having an MBA, from a top school versus anyone else, in your workforce, I wouldn't hesitate to give a chance to the guy with an MBA.
Oh, great. I think, Kenneth, you gave some very meaningful answers and insights, and I think the best line for me to take away would be that it's so much of uncertainty surrounding us. We don't know all the answers, but one of the answers could be an edge that we can create with an MBA. So I think that's great. Now, Kenneth, I'll move to the question and answers that we had scheduled for the day. I have a couple of questions from the candidates who've come in. I'm not sure how many of them would be able to take, but I'll try and club them so that we're able to answer as many as possible. So I will start with what Tamara Buchanan writes. He or she is asking, is 36 or 37 too late to apply for B school?
The answer is no.
36 or 37 years of age, yeah.
Mm-hmm. A lot depends on your own personal circumstances, and again, when I was in B school, I had people as young as 23 and as old as 37, and I have classmates who are single and those who are married with children, young children as well. So everyone copes in their own way. To me, the most important thing is not so much all those other issues. It's really also about your own personal motivation. As long as you want to do it, as long as your circumstances permit you to do it, there's no age and there's no limit to things like that.
Yeah. I think that's a valid point. So a couple of people want to know about your Spanish experience, which means was local language a barrier for you? Was knowing Spanish a key criteria to land roles inside Spain, which is to get jobs in Spain? And how would you describe your job search experience in general at IESE?
Yeah, Spain is a fascinating country, and interestingly enough, I've never been to Spain before actually going there to school. And here's the thing, for those of you who, are thinking of going to a new country, by all means do it. And you gain from so many different ways, even subtle ways. Now, first of all, the school is an English-speaking school. Now, people speak English as a second, third, fourth language. So you're going to find a lot of people who speak multiple languages. English is the only language that binds all of you together. Fear not, the course is in English. But the upside of it is that, everything else, if you wanted to learn a new language, you would have sparring partners in different, who speak different languages. You get to experience a different culture, a different lifestyle. You get to do all these things that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to do if you just kept to your comfort zone. So language was never really a barrier. But I tell you one subtle point that was really important. These days, a lot of people talk about communication skills. Now, when I talk about communication skills, I don't mean learning a language. What I mean is being able to convey ideas, from one person to another. And this is one of those things, one of those subtle points that you actually pick up when you deal with classmates from 60 different nationalities. I realized that even the way I speak, you start to train yourself to speak so that a broad-based audience can understand you. And this is particularly a problem for a lot of native speakers. If you speak English as a native language, sometimes you tend to drop in a lot of, very specific idiomatic English that a non-native speaker may not understand. So one of the things actually, curiously enough, that it trains you to do is you learn to speak to people so that they can understand. You learn to communicate. You become a better communicator. And like for me here in Malaysia, I mean, I've got a workforce that speaks everything from English, Malay, Mandarin, Cantonese, and sometimes being able to speak very standard English, or very standard Malay, to communicate to people. Now that's one of those things that, curiously enough, is something I picked up, from being in a very multicultural environment. Now, as for job search, again, it depends on the role. Now, if you go to a country that speaks a non-English language, now obviously there will be many roles that will require that specific country's local language. So you shouldn't be surprised that a Spanish company would ask for Spanish, or at least give advantage to people who also speak Spanish. So think about your fellow Spanish classmates who speak English and Spanish. Now, given a choice, obviously they would have an advantage in Spain, and likewise Italian companies or German companies, etc., etc. Now, having said that, there are also MBA specific roles where they don't actually require you to have a specific local language. They need you to have English, because a lot of these tend to be multinationals that operate across borders. But any other language is not required, but generally is an advantage depending on the company. Now, with regards to career search, what I would say is that it goes back to going to a good school. Now, like it or not, that's where going to a good school, a reputable school, has its advantages. They will have a broad alumni base, connections with local industries, big companies, and just go through the, for those of you who are exploring schools, ask them for their career statistics, check through where a lot of MBA graduates have gone on to work, and that should give you a flavor as to how good or how strong those schools are career-wise.
Oh, that sounds good. And I think I think you've answered it perfectly as well. So with that, we have a couple of other questions as well, but unfortunately our time is up. We have next sessions and the actual fair being opened up. So thank you, Kenneth, for this helpful discussion. I'm sure everyone gained a lot from this. Everyone, please enjoy the rest of our event tonight, which is at Singapore and Malaysia. And feel free to reach out with more questions to the email IDs that have been provided to you, and we will try and reach back to you. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.